The dust had barely settled on the grave of her second husband when Marcella Baker picked up his rifle, checked the chamber, and decided she was done waiting for the world to be kind to her. It was the spring of 1878, and the town of Redemption Creek, Texas, sat baking under a sky the color of old bone. The town was neither large enough to be important nor small enough to be forgotten, which meant it occupied that particular misery of a place that attracted drifters, gamblers, railroad speculators, and men with something to prove. The cottonwood trees along the creek had leafed out pale green, and the air smelled of cattle and cedar smoke and something else underneath, something older and harder, the smell of land that had been fought over too many times. Marcella was 28 years old, and she had the kind of face that made strangers feel they had met her before, dark eyes that held their ground, a jaw set like the hinges of a door nobody had been able to open. Her hair, the color of burned coffee, was pinned at the back of her neck with a practical efficiency that she had adopted after her first husband, Thomas Baker, had told her she was beautiful when it fell loose around her shoulders. She had decided after Thomas died that beauty was not a thing she needed anyone else to notice. She ran the bakery on the main street of Redemption Creek, which she had started with Thomas 8 years earlier, and had kept running through his death from a rattlesnake bite, through her second marriage to Gerald Prout, a well-meaning but ultimately weak man who had drunk himself into an early grave 6 weeks ago, and through every hard season in between. The bakery was hers. The flour on her hands every morning before sunrise was hers. The 8 loaves she could produce from the stone oven before the town woke up were hers. She did not need saving. She had told the preacher that when he had come by with his hat in his hands and his good intentions on his sleeve, offering to speak on her behalf to the town council regarding Gerald's debts. She had told Sheriff Brannock the same thing when he had suggested she might want to take in a boarder, hinting heavily that his deputy was unmarried and decent. She had told her friend Clara Webb, who ran the dress shop across the street, when Clara had proposed a long list of eligible men in the surrounding counties. She did not need saving. What she needed was to keep the creditors from taking the building, pay back the $240 Gerald had borrowed from Ezra Hollies, the town's most unforgiving lender, and find a way to expand the bakery's income before the railroad camp, 20 miles north, finished its season and took half her customers with it. She had a plan, and the plan did not include anyone else. Patrick Ellsworth rode into Redemption Creek on a Thursday morning in April. His horse, a big, steady bay named Cordell, who had the unhurried gait of an animal that had been asked to carry a man across many miles, and had done it without complaint. Patrick was 32, lean in the manner of a man who had worked hard all his life and eaten irregularly, with brown hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of the creek when the sun was at the right angle, somewhere between gray and green. There was a scar along his left jaw from a knife fight he had not started and had won, and his hands were the kind that showed their history, rope-burned, calloused, knuckle-scarred. He was not a lawman and not an outlaw, which put him in a category that the West had a hard time knowing what to do with. He had been a cattle drover for 6 years, a carpenter's apprentice before that, and had spent 2 years in the employ of a surveying company out of San Antonio before the company had collapsed when its principal investor was found to have been cheating the books. He had $37 to his name, a bedroll, a set of carpenter's tools in good condition, a Winchester repeating rifle, and a letter of introduction from a man named Cal Reeves in San Antonio to a man named Dowd in Redemption Creek who needed a barn built. What he did not have, and had not had for a while, was anywhere particular to be. He found Dowd's feed store on the east end of the main street and conducted his business in 20 minutes. Dowd, a thick man with a gray beard and the cautious generosity of someone who had been cheated before, confirmed the barn job, offered him $3 a day in meals, and told him it would take 3 weeks if the weather held. Patrick accepted, shook the man's hand, and walked back out into the April morning. He was looking for a place to get coffee and something to eat when he noticed the bakery. The sign was hand-lettered in steady, clean strokes, Baker's Bread and Provisions, established 1870. The smell coming from inside was extraordinary, yeast and warm sugar and something spiced, and Patrick, who had been living on trail jerky and creek water for the better part of a week, felt his entire body turn toward it with the helpless gratitude of a compass finding north. He pushed open the door. The woman behind the counter was in the middle of an argument. The man on the other side of the counter was heavy-set, pink-faced, dressed in the decent suit of a man who wanted to be taken for prosperous. He had the particular posture of someone who was used to being agreed with and was encountering resistance he found personally insulting. "Mrs. Pruitt," the man was saying, his voice carrying the smooth oil of practiced pressure, "I am not asking you to surrender the property. I am asking you to consider a reasonable arrangement. Mr. Gerald Pruitt, God rest him, borrowed that money against this building as collateral. That is the nature of collateral, Mrs. Pruitt. It exists precisely for this situation." "I know what collateral is, Mr. Hollies," the woman said. Her voice was even and cold as winter stone. "I also know that Gerald had 60 days from the date of the note, and those 60 days are not up for another 32. So whatever reasonable arrangement you are imagining it ahead of schedule. Be that as it may, the practical reality, she said, setting both hands flat on the counter with a sound like a judge's gavel, is that you will have your money within the 32 days remaining, and you will leave my bakery now, because you have not purchased anything and you are taking up space that paying customers could use." Patrick had stopped just inside the doorway. He took in the scene with the particular stillness of a man who had learned, through years of tight situations, that the first thing to do in an unfamiliar room was to understand it before acting in it. He watched the man named Hollies arrange his features into something between offense and threat, watched the woman hold his gaze without blinking, and he thought, almost involuntarily, that he had never seen anyone look quite so certain. Hollies left. He passed Patrick in the doorway without looking at him, exuding the bruised dignity of a man who would be back. Patrick stepped fully into the bakery. The woman behind the counter looked at him with the same level attention she had used on Hollies, though it was a different kind of looking, an assessment rather than a confrontation. "Good morning," Patrick said. "I was hoping to get coffee, and whatever you have that is fresh." "Coffee is 5 cents, she said. "I have cornbread and cinnamon rolls this morning. Cornbread is 2 cents apiece. Rolls are 3. 2 rolls and a coffee," he said, and put a dime on the counter. She brought them without ceremony, though she poured the coffee herself from the pot on the iron stove behind her, and when she set the cup down in front of him, there was a small, involuntary precision to the gesture that told him she took care with the ordinary things. He noticed that and filed it away. He sat at the single small table near the window and ate. The rolls were exceptional. He ate one and then the other slowly, looking out at the street, listening to the sounds of the town waking up around him. "Those are the best cinnamon rolls I have had in several years," he said when he brought the cup back to the counter for a refill. She looked at him. "Where have you been eating?" "Trail, mostly. Cattle drives out of Abilene, then survey work down south." "That explains it," she said, and there was not quite a smile but something adjacent to one, a slight shift in the gravity of her expression. "Patrick Ellsworth," he said, because it seemed like the thing to do. "Marcella Baker," she said. "Pruitt technically, but Baker is the name on the sign and the name I intend to keep." He nodded, accepting this as the information it was. "I am doing a barn job for Dowd, should be 3 weeks. I expect I will be in here fairly often if you can stand a regular customer." "I can stand customers who pay," she said. He smiled. She did not quite, but she did not look away either. He came back the next morning and the morning after that. By the end of the first week, he had established a routine that involved arriving just as she opened at 6 in the morning, ordering coffee and whatever was fresh, and sitting at the window table for 30 minutes before walking to Dowd's farm on the edge of town. He did not make unnecessary conversation. He did not offer opinions she had not asked for. He did not look at her with any of the various flavors of intention she had become practiced at recognizing in men. He was just there, steady and undemanding, the way Cordell stood at the hitching post outside. She found herself, against her own inclinations, noticing things about him. The way he held his coffee cup with both hands in the morning, as though he needed the warmth. The fact that he always left the exact right amount on the counter, never expecting change, never making a production of generosity. The quality of his silence, which was not the silence of a man with nothing to say, but the silence of a man who had decided that what he said ought to mean something. She told herself this was just the noticing that came from spending time in a small space with a person. She was observant by nature. It meant nothing. On the 9th day of his stay, she found out what his hands could do beyond drive cattle. She was trying to repair the hinge on the back door of the bakery, which had been pulling loose from the doorframe for 2 weeks. She had wedged a folded flour sack under the bottom of the door to keep it from dragging and had been meaning to fix it properly. But every day there was bread to bake and accounts to keep, and the slow, exhausting arithmetic of making 32 days' worth of income stretched to cover $240. She was on her knees with a screwdriver when she heard him come through the front. "The sign says open," he called. "It is open," she called back. "Coffee is on the stove, help yourself and leave the money on the counter." There was a pause. Then she heard him come through to the back room and she looked up to find him standing in the doorway looking at the hinge. "That needs to come out entirely," he said. "The wood around it is stripped. You need to plug the holes and reset it." "I know what it needs," she said. "I can do it," he said. "I have my tools with me. I can have it done in an hour." She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "What do you want for it?" He looked briefly surprised, as though the question had not occurred to him. "Nothing," he said. "I am already here. I have the tools. It is an hour's work." "I do not accept charity," she said. The words came out with a precision that was not anger but was not softness either. She had said some version of them enough times that they arrived ready-made. He considered this for a moment, not with the frustration she usually encountered, not trying to talk her out of it, but genuinely considering it. "Then feed me breakfast," he said. "I have not eaten yet. I came straight here." She looked at him for a long moment. "Eggs and bread and coffee." "That is more than fair," he said. He fixed the hinge. He did it with the competence of someone who understood materials and tools, without hurry. And when he was finished, the door swung clean and true and latched with a satisfying click. He swept up the wood dust himself without being asked. She made him eggs scrambled with a little dried chili pepper the way she made them for herself, and cut thick slices of the morning's bread and poured coffee and set it on the small table. He ate with the honest appetite of a man doing physical work and said when he had finished that the eggs were perfect. "The chili is the thing," she said before she could stop herself. "I thought so," he said and smiled, and she found herself looking at her own hands on the counter. That afternoon, while she was doing her accounts at the table after closing, she tallied what she had. $43 in the cash box, the promise of a standing order from the railroad camp that would bring in roughly $40 over the next 3 weeks if she could arrange transport, and the possibility of a contract with the new hotel being built on the edge of town, which the owner, a man named Garrett, had mentioned twice without following through. She needed to close the gap between what she had and what she owed. $240 in 30 days, which meant she needed to nearly double what the bakery currently made. It was possible. It was the kind of possible that lived right at the edge of what a person could do alone. She had been doing things alone for a long time. The following Saturday, Redemption Creek had its weekly market day, when the surrounding ranches and farms sent people in for supplies and socializing, and the main street filled up with wagons and the complicated business of a small frontier community trying to hold itself together. Marcella brought out a display table in front of the bakery and sold bread, rolls, and a half-dozen small pies she had been up since 3 in the morning to produce. By noon she had sold out, which was satisfying, and was cleaning up the table when Clara Webb came across from the dress shop, her red hair bright in the noon sun, her expression carrying the particular energy of someone with news. "I heard from Mrs. Dowd that you have someone doing repairs for you," Clara said, not managing to keep the interest entirely out of her voice. "He fixed a hinge," Marcella said. "Mrs. Dowd says he is very handsome. Mrs. Dowd is 45 and married." "Observations do not require eligibility," Clara said with dignity. She helped Marcella fold the display cloth. "She also says Hollies is telling people you will not make the payment and he is going to have the building by May." Marcella's hands went still. "He is telling people that. At the saloon, apparently, which means everyone knows." She folded the cloth with more force than was necessary. "Then everyone will know he is wrong when I make the payment." Clara watched her with the careful attention of a friend who knew when to push and when not to. "Is there anything I can do?" "You can tell me," Marcella said, picking up the empty basket, "whether Garrett from the hotel has actually hired a baker yet." Clara's eyes lit up. "He has not. I know this because his wife ordered a dress and I spent 2 hours with her last week. She said they have been trying to find someone to supply bread and pastry for the dining room, but no one in town makes enough." Marcella looked at her. "You could have mentioned that." "I am mentioning it now," Clara said. That afternoon, Marcella put on the only dress that was not covered in flour stains and walked down to the site of the new hotel. It was a 2-story wood frame building that smelled of fresh lumber and ambition, and the owner, a broad-shouldered man named Frederick Garrett, was standing outside it talking to his foreman. She introduced herself, presented her case in the direct, unhurried way she had of speaking, and showed him the bread she had brought as a sample. He ate a piece standing up, then called his wife over, and his wife ate a piece and closed her eyes briefly. "How much?" Garrett said. They negotiated for 20 minutes. She walked away with a contract for 60 loaves a week at 4 cents a loaf, starting in 2 weeks, which was $2.40 per week, or roughly $10 a month. It was not the whole solution, but it was a piece of it. She was walking back up the main street feeling the particular satisfaction of a problem partially solved when she nearly walked into Patrick Ellsworth coming out of the hardware store. He caught her arm briefly to steady her and let go immediately. "Sorry," he said. "My fault," she said. "I was not watching." He looked at her for a moment, then at the roll of paper under her arm. "Good news," he said, because apparently something in her face was visible. "A contract," she said, "with the new hotel." "Well done," he said, and said it the way a person says a thing they actually mean, without the condescension that sometimes hides inside congratulations given to a woman doing business. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said, and meant it in a way that surprised her. They stood on the street for a moment in the warm Saturday afternoon, the sounds of market day still moving around them, and she found herself thinking that he was easy to be near in a way that most people were not. "I am thinking of going to the creek this evening," he said. "I was going to ask if you knew whether the fishing was any good." "It is not," she said. "The creek runs low this time of year." "You want the pond on the Alvarez property about a mile south. Jose Alvarez will not mind, he lets people fish there." "Thank you," he said. "Do not try to catch anything after 5, she said, because the information was useful and she had it. "The catfish stop moving when the light changes." He smiled. "How do you know that?" "My father taught me," she said. He was very serious about fishing. It was more than she had told him about herself in 10 days of morning coffee, and she felt the small tug of it, the way telling something small to someone created a thread between you. She went home. He was not at the bakery the next morning, which was Sunday, because she did not open on Sunday. But on Monday morning he arrived as usual, and she noticed that he looked rested in the way that an evening outdoors produces. "Was the pond good?" she asked, before she could decide not to. "Caught 4 catfish," he said. "Your advice about the timing was correct." "I know," she said, and poured his coffee. He looked up at her with something in his eyes she chose not to name. "Thank you, Marcella," he said. It was the first time he had used her name directly, and it did something peculiar to the air in the room. "You are welcome, Patrick," she said, and was surprised to hear his name in her own voice. The second week of his stay brought a cold snap, unusual for April but not unheard of in central Texas, and with it a problem. The stone oven in the bakery was developing a crack along the left side of the firebox, and in the colder temperatures it was affecting the heat distribution. 2 batches of bread came out uneven on Monday morning, one side pale, one side overdone, and she had to discount them. She stood looking at the oven after the morning rush with her arms crossed and her jaw set and her mind running calculations. A stonemason would be expensive. The nearest one was in San Marcos, 40 miles. She could try to repair it herself with fire clay, but she had never done it and did not know if she would do it correctly. She was still standing there, not wanting to ask, and asking anyway in the privacy of her own thoughts, when the front door opened and Patrick came in. He was not due for coffee. It was mid-morning. He came in with his carpenter's bag and set it on the counter and said, "Dowd mentioned you might be having trouble with the oven." She felt the resistance rise in her automatically, the same resistance she always felt when someone arrived wanting to fix something she had not asked them to fix. "I did not say I needed help," she said. "You did not," he agreed. "Then why are you here?" He met her eyes steadily. "Because I know something about masonry. My uncle was a stonemason in Missouri. I spent 2 summers helping him when I was young. I am not a professional, but I know how to repair a firebox crack, and I have seen the oven through the window every morning for 2 weeks, and I have been wondering when it was going to give you trouble." He paused. "I am not here to save you from anything. I am here because I have a skill that is useful, and it seems to me you have a problem the skill fits." She looked at him for a long moment. "I am not someone who needs rescuing," she said. It came out more directly than she intended, not as an accusation but as the simple statement it was, the most essential true thing about her. "I know that," he said, and the way he said it was different from the way people usually responded to that statement, which was with patience or patronizing understanding. He said it the way a person confirms a fact they already knew. "I do not have any interest in rescuing you. You have built something real here. You run it well. I just happen to know how to fix a firebox crack, and I think it would be a waste to not use that knowledge when it could be useful. You can watch everything I do, tell me to stop at any point, and I will leave the materials with you so you know how to do it yourself if it happens again." He looked at her. "I have come to be useful, not heroic. There is a difference." She held his gaze. Something in her chest, some carefully maintained architecture, shifted slightly, not collapsed, just moved. "Show me what materials you need," she said. "I want to know what this costs before you begin." He showed her the fire clay and the tools he needed, most of which he already had, cost her $2. He spent 3 hours on the repair, explaining every step while he worked, not because she asked him to explain, but because he understood that she needed to know how it was done. She watched with the focused attention she gave to everything, asking questions when she had them, and he answered them directly without condescension. When he was finished and the repair had set and she had fired the oven back up and it was running clean and even, she made them both coffee and cut 2 thick slices of the morning's bread with butter, and they sat on opposite sides of the small table. "You could have charged me double for this, and I could not have found anyone to do it cheaper," she said. "I charged you the cost of materials," he said. "Why?" He thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because I do not need more than that from you," he said. "The Dowd barn pays me. You have other things you need that money for." She looked down at her coffee. She was used to the way generosity could be a form of leverage, a way to create debt. She had become expert at identifying it. What he was offering felt different in a way she did not entirely know how to categorize. "I do not like owing people," she said. "Then you do not owe me," he said. "You watched me work and asked good questions, and now you know how to do it yourself. That is an exchange." She looked at him. The afternoon light was coming through the window at a low angle, and it caught the line of his jaw, the slight curve at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile. "You are a strange man, Patrick Ellsworth," she said. "Probably," he said, and drank his coffee. The third week brought rain, which was good for the land and complicated for everything else. The roads turned to mud, which meant Dowd's farm site was too wet to work for 2 days, and Patrick found himself at loose ends in a way he was not accustomed to. He spent one afternoon in the saloon, not drinking heavily but nursing a single whiskey and playing cards with a restrained competence that won him $4, and he spent the other afternoon in the livery making sure Cordell was comfortable and doing minor repairs on his tack. Redemption Creek was a town in the process of deciding what it was going to become. The railroad's arrival had brought in new money and new people, and with them, the usual complications. There were 2 competing land claims at the courthouse, one of them involving a family named Morales who had held their land under a Spanish grant for 60 years and were being disputed by a speculator from Austin who had filed competing paperwork. Sheriff Brannock was trying to hold the line, but his authority was limited and the speculator had a lawyer. Marcella knew the Morales family. Elena Morales had been buying bread from her since she opened, and her son Diego had worked briefly as a delivery boy for the bakery when he was younger. She had been watching the land dispute with a quiet fury that she kept mostly to herself, because there was nothing she could do about it, because she was one woman with her own problems, and because the system that was swallowing the Morales property was the same system that had been swallowing things from people who looked like the Morales family for as long as anyone could remember. She talked about it to Patrick on a rainy Tuesday morning when the mud kept the street quiet and they were the only 2 people in the bakery for an hour. "It will not end well for them," she said, looking out at the street. "It never does. The lawyers come in with paperwork and the paperwork wins over families that have been living on the land since before this country knew what to do with the land." Patrick held his cup and was quiet for a moment. "My father lost land," he said. "Different circumstances, a bank rather than a speculator, but the result was the same. There is something particularly brutal about losing land because it is not just property, it is identity." She looked at him. "Where did you grow up?" "Missouri," he said. "Small farm. My father sold it to pay a debt he never should have had to pay. We moved to Kansas when I was 12. He paused. "I have been moving ever since." "Is that why?" she said. He turned to look at her. "Why what?" "Why you have been moving. Because you lost the thing that was supposed to be where you stayed." He was quiet for a long moment, and she watched something move through his expression, something old and honest. "I think that is probably part of it," he said. She did not say anything. She understood the logic of it completely. She had not been moving because she had built the bakery, and the bakery was the thing that had replaced the identity she had lost when Thomas died. The flour and the oven and the smell of bread in the morning were the foundation she stood on. "What happened to your first husband?" he asked, and immediately followed it with, "If that is something you are willing to say." "Rattlesnake," she said. "He was out mending fence. He was 31 years old." She said it the way she always said it, flat and factual, because the emotion that lived underneath it was not something she let out in front of people. "He was a good man." "I am sorry," Patrick said, and he said it simply, without the elaborate sympathy that usually accompanied the statement, which meant it landed cleanly. "Gerald was not bad either," she said, "just weak, and the whiskey found that weakness and used it." She looked at her hands on the table. "I am not bitter about it. I am just done expecting something from men that they do not know how to give." He looked at her. "What is that?" "Reliability," she said, meeting his eyes. He held her gaze. He did not argue the point or defend the gender or offer himself as an exception. He just looked at her with those Creekwater eyes and said, "That is reasonable." She thought about that exchange for 3 days afterward. The rain ended on Wednesday, and Dowd's farm came back to life, and Patrick resumed work on the barn with the steady rhythm she had come to associate with him. She could not see the farm from the bakery, but she could see him arriving in the morning and leaving in the afternoon, and she was aware, with a sharpness that she found irritating that she watched for him. Clara noticed. "You are watching the street again," Clara said when she came in for her morning roll on Thursday. "I am watching for customers," Marcella said. "You are watching for a particular customer who walks past this window heading east every morning at 6:15, Clara said, sitting down and pouring her own coffee with the comfort of long habit. "I have eyes, Marcy." Marcella sat across from her and said nothing. "He is kind," Clara said more gently now, the teasing falling away. "I have talked to him twice at the market. He is quiet, but he is not closed, and he looks at you when you are not looking at him." "He does not," Marcella said. "He absolutely does," Clara said, with a kind of careful respect which is not how most of the men in this town look at anyone, let alone you. She picked up her roll and broke it in half. "You are allowed to let someone in, you know." "It has been 2 years since Thomas, almost 2 years since Gerald." "Gerald was not letting someone in," Marcella said. "Gerald was trying to solve loneliness with a marriage certificate. And did it not work?" "It worked for a while," she said, with more honesty than she intended. "But not really. No." Clara ate her roll and looked at her friend with the patient love of someone who had known her for a long time. "What are you afraid of?" she said. Marcella thought about the question for a moment. She had been afraid of many things in her life: snakes, creditors, a bad winter, fire, the specific vulnerability of caring about something that could be taken away. But the thing she felt now, the thing that gathered in her chest on Thursday mornings when she was watching for a particular man coming down the street, was not exactly fear. "I am afraid," she said slowly, "of needing something I cannot build myself." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe that is the point," she said. "Ezra Hollis came back on Friday afternoon. He came with a man she had not seen before, a younger man in an Austin suit who carried the particular bearing of legal authority. They sat down in her bakery as though they owned it, which they were in the process of trying to arrange, and presented her with a document that Hollis explained was a formal demand for payment in full, in advance of the 60-day deadline, on the grounds of what the younger man called material deterioration of collateral value. She read the document twice, slowly and carefully, the way she read everything. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest, but her face was not doing anything at all. "This says I have 7 days, she said. "That is correct," the lawyer said. "My agreement says 32 days from Gerald's death," she said, "which is 15 more days from today, not 7. The clause regarding material deterioration shows me where that clause is in the original agreement," she said. There was a pause. "The standard practice in cases of," the lawyer began. "I did not ask about standard practice," she said. "I asked you to show me where that clause exists in the note Gerald signed. Because I have a copy of that note and I read it very carefully before Gerald signed it, and I do not recall any deterioration clause." Hollis had gone slightly pink. "Mrs. Prout, I assure you that the law supports." "Then let us ask the law," she said. "I will speak to Sheriff Brannock today. I will also write to the county courthouse. I will also, and I want to be very clear about this, speak to the editor of the Redemption Creek Gazette, who has been looking for an interesting story about local commerce." She folded the document and set it precisely in front of him. "You may take this back, Mr. Hollis. I will have your money in full before the 15 days are up. Good afternoon." Hollis opened his mouth, closed it, stood up, left. She sat at the table for 5 minutes after they were gone, breathing slowly, pressing her hands flat against the wood to keep them from shaking. Not from fear, exactly. From the particular cost of that kind of steadiness, the energy it took to not let anyone see you waver. Then she got up, put the flour sack back over the counter, and started the evening's prep. Patrick came in the next morning with a bruise on his left hand. She noticed it when he set his cup down, a dark spread across the knuckles. "What happened?" she said. "Hammer found the wrong target," he said. "I am fine." She looked at him. The bruise was fresh, yesterday's, and it was not quite in the right place for a hammer misfire. "You were in the saloon last night," she said. He met her eyes, briefly. "Was there trouble?" He paused. A man was being unpleasant to the barmaid, he said. I asked him to stop, and he did not. Eventually he did. She poured his coffee and set it down and looked at his hand. Soak it in cold water this evening. It will help the swelling. I know, he said. I have done this before. I know you know, she said. I am telling you anyway. She met his eyes. Thank you for asking him to stop. He looked at her, something shifting slightly in his expression. It was the right thing to do, he said. The right thing and the common thing are not always the same thing, she said. He held her gaze for a moment that stretched in a way she did not resist. No, he said. They are not. She told him about Holly's that morning, not because she needed advice, but because she had found over the past 2 weeks that he listened in a way that helped her think. She laid out the situation clearly, the numbers, the timeline, the contract with Garrett, the railroad camp order, and the gap that remained. He listened without interrupting. You need about $60 more, he said when she had finished. 54, she said. If everything comes in as expected. What would it take to make $54 in 15 days? She looked at the ceiling. I could do a second baking on Tuesday and Thursday evenings for the ranch houses. Most of them get bread from me on market days, but I know at least 4 of them who would pay for delivery. The problem is transport. I do not have a wagon, and borrowing one costs money. I have Cordell, Patrick said. He can carry saddlebags. That is not exactly a wagon, but for 4 ranch houses that are how far out? The nearest is 3 miles. The farthest is 8, he thought. If I ride out after the barn day is finished, I can get to all 4 before dark. The Dow job finishes at the end of next week, so I have the week after that free. She looked at him carefully. That is 2 weeks of your evenings. I do not have other plans for my evenings, he said. Patrick, she said his name with a particular gravity. I am not going to pretend this is just a hinge repair. This is a significant amount of your time. He met her eyes. He was not going to look away from the directness of her. She could see that. I know, he said. Why, she said. It was the simplest and most honest question she knew how to ask. He understood it as such. Because I have been here for 2 weeks, he said carefully, and in that time I have watched you run this place with more competence and more courage than most people I have met in my entire life. You are fair to your customers and honest about your prices, and you did not blink when Holly's was standing across that counter trying to frighten you. And he stopped, started again. I would like to be useful to you, not because I think you cannot manage without me. You clearly can. But because having something worth being useful to is, he paused, looking for the word. It has been a while since I had that. She was quiet for a long moment. The bakery smelled of yeast and wood smoke and morning. Outside, the street was coming to life with the small sounds of a Thursday in a small town, boot heels on the boardwalk, a horse's whinny, the distant clank of the blacksmith's shop opening up. All right, she said. We will work out a fair arrangement. You do not have to. I know I do not have to, she said. I am choosing to. A fair arrangement. I will pay you for the delivery time. You do not need to pay me, Patrick, she said. He stopped. I accept help, she said. I do not accept charity. There is a difference. He looked at her with those Creekwater eyes, and for the first time since she had known him, his expression shifted into something that was not quite calm, something that moved underneath it. All right, he said. A fair arrangement. They worked out the terms that morning, sitting across the table with a piece of paper between them, and Marcella felt something she had not felt in a very long time. The sensation of making a plan with someone rather than alone. The 2 weeks that followed were, by any practical measure, the most relentlessly busy of Marcella's already busy life. She added the Tuesday and Thursday evening batches, which meant she was rising at 3 every morning and working until 9 at night. She fulfilled the Garrett Hotel contract, which began on the first Thursday of May, and required her to have 60 loaves ready for delivery before 7 in the morning. She managed the railroad camp order, which involved a man named Collins from the camp coming in twice a week to pick up supplies. And every other evening, Patrick loaded the saddlebags with wrapped bread parcels and rode out to the 4 ranch houses. He was unfailingly reliable. He left at the time they agreed, returned with the collected payments at the time they agreed, handed her the money with a clean accounting of what had been paid and what, in one case, had been short, and then did not linger unless she invited it. But sometimes she invited it. On the second Thursday evening, when he came back with the collections and the night was warm for the first time since the cold snap, she had made coffee and there was bread left over from the day, and she asked him if he wanted to sit on the back step for a while. He said yes. They sat on the step that looked out over the small yard behind the bakery where she had a kitchen garden in the first cautious stages of spring, and they drank coffee and ate bread and watched the stars come out. The creek made a soft sound a quarter-mile away. Somewhere north, a coyote called once and then was quiet. "I used to do this with my father," she said. "Sit outside in the evening. He would smoke a pipe and I would talk and he would listen. He was a very good listener." "Is he still living?" "He died the year before Thomas," she said. "Fever, he was 53. She paused. "I lost them in the same 2 years. My father, then Thomas. I suppose that is why I am the way I am." "Which way is that?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "Careful about what I let in," she said, "because the things I have let in have a way of leaving." He was quiet for a moment, his forearms on his knees, looking out at the garden. The starlight was generous tonight. "I understand that," he said, "though I think my version of the same thing has been the opposite. I stopped putting down roots because I was afraid of what it would mean if they were pulled up." He paused. "Which means I have been pulling them up myself preemptively." She looked at his profile in the starlight, the scar along his jaw, the set of his shoulders, which was not tense but not relaxed either, the posture of a man who was saying something real and knew it. "Do you want to stay somewhere?" she said. He turned to look at her. The question had more layers than a simple question about geography, and they both knew it. "I did not think I did," he said. "For a long time I did not." He held her gaze. "I think I am reconsidering." She felt the heat of the statement in the center of her chest, slow and spreading. She did not look away. "Patrick," she said, in a voice that was not quite the bakery voice, the business voice she had been using for 2 years to keep everything clean and contained. "I need to tell you something." "All right," he said. "I am not easy," she said. "I am not soft. I have been broken open twice and put myself back together both times, and the putting back together changes a person. I am direct and I am stubborn, and I have very little patience for people who do not mean what they say." "I know," he said. "And I am—" She stopped, started again. "I am not closed. I just need things to be true. I need the people I need things to be true." He was looking at her steadily. "I am not in the habit of saying things I do not mean," he said. "I say less rather than more usually, but what I say is true." She looked at him for a long moment in the starlight, measuring the statement, finding its sound. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They sat on the back step a while longer, not saying much, and the night settled around them with the easy weight of something that had been decided without being declared. On the last day of his Dowd job, a Friday in the middle of May, Patrick walked to the bakery mid-morning during his break and paid for a coffee and a roll and sat at the window table. Marcella was serving 2 ranchers from the eastern hills, and a woman she knew slightly, Mrs. Pierce, who came in once a week for a loaf. She moved through the morning tasks with her usual competence and economy of motion, and Patrick watched her with the undefended openness of a man who had stopped trying to manage his own response. He was in love with her. He had known it for some time. He was not in any hurry about what to do with it, because he understood that she was a woman who required reality and not performance, and the most important thing was to let the truth of it build into something solid before he tried to speak it. When Mrs. Pierce had gone and the ranchers had gone, Marcella refilled his coffee without being asked and leaned against the counter across from him. "Dowd finishes today," she said. "This afternoon," he confirmed. "What comes after?" He looked at her. "I had a letter from a man in Fredericksburg who needs a barn and a smokehouse. Month's work, good pay." She absorbed this without expression, and he watched something careful happen in her face, the slight pulling in that he had come to recognize as her response to things she was not going to let herself say. "That makes sense," she said. "I have not answered him yet," Patrick said. She looked at him. "There is work here," he said. The new hotel's construction is not finished. I spoke with Garrett on Wednesday. He needs a foreman carpenter for the interior finishing, 6 to 8 weeks, and he was asking around for someone with the right skills. He paused. I told him I would let him know. Why are you telling me this? She said, though her voice was not entirely steady saying it. Because I would like to know, he said, whether there is a reason to stay. The bakery was very quiet. The street outside was doing its mid-morning business. The smell of the morning's baking was still warm in the air. Marcella Baker set her hands on the counter and looked at Patrick Ellsworth with all the honesty she had. There is a reason, she said. He held her gaze. The thing in his expression that was always there, that careful steadiness, shifted into something warmer and more unguarded. Then I will tell Garrett yes, he said. She nodded once and turned to take a fresh loaf from the rack, and neither of them said anything else, but the silence was of a completely different quality than it had been before. The payment to Holly's happened on the 12th of May, 4 days before the deadline. She walked into his office in the middle of the afternoon with an envelope containing $240, laid it on his desk, waited while he counted it, and collected her receipt. She said nothing unnecessary. He said nothing unnecessary. The building was hers. She walked back up the street and into the bakery and sat down at the small table and pressed her hands flat against the wood and breathed. Then she stood up and started the afternoon bake. Clara came in at 4 o'clock with a bottle of rye whiskey she had been keeping for a special occasion and insisted on exactly 1 pour each to mark the occasion, and Marcella allowed it, and they clinked their small glasses together over the bakery table. What did it feel like? Clara said. Like putting something down that has been very heavy, Marcella said. Clara looked at her with the particular smile that meant she was about to say something. And the other thing. The man helping with deliveries. He is staying, Marcella said. Clara's smile widened into something uncontained. Is he? He took the Garrett job, Marcella said, 6 to 8 weeks. And after that, Marcella looked at her glass. She thought about the back step and the stars and the way he had said what he said is true. I do not know yet, she said, but I am not afraid of not knowing. Clara reached across and squeezed her hand. Good, she said. The next 6 weeks were the kind of weeks that happen when something real was being built. Not fast or dramatic, but steadily, day by day, in the accumulation of ordinary things that became extraordinary in retrospect. Patrick worked at the hotel and came to the bakery every morning. He and Marcella had fallen into a rhythm that extended beyond the professional. He often stayed after the morning rush to help with tasks she had been managing alone, not because she could not do them, but because he was there and it was sensible, and she had stopped resisting the sensibility of it. She repaired a loose board on the front step. He replaced the cracked window glass in the back room. She made supper on Tuesday evenings, not elaborate, bread and beans and whatever she had, and he brought the coffee because he had found a source of particularly good ground coffee from a Mexican trader who came through once a month, and they ate at the small table in the back. He told her about Missouri, about his father and the farm and the years of drifting. She told him about her parents, about Thomas, about the early years of the bakery when she and Thomas had been so poor that they had eaten their own unsold bread for dinner for 3 months straight and been genuinely grateful for it. She showed him how to make her cornbread, with the particular ratio of corn to flour that her mother had taught her, and he made it badly the first time and well the second, and she told him the second was good with a directness that he received as the high compliment it was. He met Alina Morales at the bakery one morning when Alina came in for her weekly order, and when Alina had left, Patrick said, "The land dispute." "It is not going well," Marcella said. He was quiet for a moment. "I know someone," he said, "a man named Abelard in San Antonio. He is a legal advocate who works on land grant disputes. He has won several." He paused. "I do not know if it would help." "But I could write to him." Marcella looked at him. "That would cost money." "He works on contingency for cases he believes in," Patrick said. "He took my acquaintance's case for nothing up front." He met her eyes. "I am not promising anything. I am just saying I could write a letter." "Write it," she said. He wrote it that evening. The response came 3 weeks later, and Abelard, who turned out to be a fastidious man with an impressive record in Spanish grant cases, agreed to look at the Morales papers. The case would not resolve quickly, Patrick told Marcella carefully. It was a legal process that could take a year or more. But the wheel had been set in motion. Elena Morales came into the bakery the day after she met with Abelard, and she took Marcella's hand across the counter and held it and said, "Thank you," in a voice that had something in it that was very old and very tired. Marcella said, "It was Patrick who wrote the letter." Elena looked at her, looked through to something. "He is a good man," she said. Marcella said, "Yes," without hesitation, and was mildly surprised by her own lack of hesitation. The 4th of July brought a celebration to Redemption Creek, a dance on the main street with a fiddle player from San Marcos and a caller who wore a hat with a peacock feather in it. Half the county came in, and the street was strung with lanterns, and the baking trade was extraordinary, Marcella having made 4 dozen small sweet rolls and 2 dozen cornbread rounds that were gone before sunset. Patrick had spent the day at the hotel, finishing the last room of the interior work, which meant the garret job was done. He arrived at the celebration at dusk, clean-shaved and in a shirt that was not a work shirt, and found Marcella standing on the edge of the dancing with Clara, watching the town's children chase each other through the lamplight. He stood beside her. They watched the dancing for a while, the fiddle pulling everyone into something that looked like pure, uncomplicated happiness. "Would you like to dance?" he said. She looked at him. "I have not danced in quite a while," she said. "Neither have I," he said. "I suspect we will manage." She took his hand. They were not graceful exactly, but they were genuine, moving through the steps of a reel with the awkward earnestness of 2 people who had been serious for a long time and were allowing themselves to be something else for a few minutes. She laughed when he stepped wrong, a real laugh, not the polite near smile she used in the bakery. He heard it, and it moved through him like the first warm day after a long winter. Clara, from the side of the street, watched them with an expression of profound personal satisfaction. When the reel finished and they stepped back from the crowd, their hands still loosely joined, the lantern light making gold of everything, Patrick looked at her and did not look away. "Marcella," he said. She turned to face him fully. "I know you are careful," he said. "I know you have been broken and you have repaired yourself and you are not interested in going through that again. I am not going to ask you for anything you are not ready to give." He held her gaze. "But I need to tell you that I love you. Because I said I only say what is true, and this is true, and it would not be right to not say it." The lantern light was warm on his face. The fiddle had started something slow. Around them, the town was dancing and talking and being alive in the way towns were on summer nights. She looked at him for a long moment. She felt the fullness of it, the weight and reality of what he had said, and underneath her careful architecture, the thing she had been building and tending and protecting for a long time recognized what it was hearing and answered it. "I love you," she said. "I have been trying not to for several weeks, and I have not succeeded." He looked at her. His expression was not triumphant or relieved. It was simply, profoundly moved, the face of a man receiving something he had not been certain he deserved. He brought her hand up and pressed his mouth to the back of it, and then to her knuckle, and then, when she did not step back, he pulled her gently into him and she went, pressing her face against his jaw, his arms coming around her with the steadiness of everything she had ever wanted from steadiness. They stood like that while the fiddle played and the town celebrated its holiday, and she thought, with the clarity that sometimes comes when the thing you have been afraid of turns out to be the thing that holds you, that she was not afraid. They were not reckless about it. That was not who either of them was. They took it at the pace of real things, which was not slow exactly but was deliberate, each step tested before weight was put on it. He asked, 2 weeks after the 4th of July, whether she would consider letting him stay in Redemption Creek permanently. He had been offered a position as the town's primary carpenter by 3 separate business owners, and Garrett wanted him to oversee the hotel's planned expansion in the fall, and there was enough work to make a living from. She said yes, she would consider it, and then said more honestly that she had already considered it and the answer was yes. He found lodgings at the widower Thornton's house on the north end of town, 2 rooms that were clean and sufficient, and he put his carpenter's tools in the corner and hung Cordell's saddle on the wall peg, and for the first time in many years unpacked his bag. In August, on a hot evening when the creek was low and the air smelled of cedar and warm grass, he asked her to marry him. They were in her kitchen garden, which had grown into a real thing over the summer, beans climbing the poles and tomatoes heavy on the vine. He asked her the way he did everything directly, without decoration, and she looked at him in the evening light and said yes with the same directness, and they stood in the kitchen garden in the late August heat with their hands together, and the knowledge of what they had built between them solid under their feet. The wedding was small, in the way both of them preferred. It happened in September when the heat had broken and the mornings were coming in cooler, at the courthouse with Judge Monroe, with Clara and Dowd as witnesses. Marcella wore a blue dress that Clara had made, the color of the creek at the right angle, and Patrick wore his best suit, which was not very best, but she had pressed it for him the night before and it was decent. Clara cried. Dowd shook Patrick's hand for a long time. They walked back to the bakery together afterward, which was theirs now in the fullest sense, and she made coffee and he cut bread, and they sat at the small table by the window that had been his table since the first morning he had walked through the door, and they drank their coffee in the easy, comfortable silence of people who had earned each other. The winter of 1878 was a working winter, which was the only kind Marcella knew. The hotel's dining room had taken the bread contract to a full order of 90 loaves per week, and she hired a girl named Rose to help with the morning bake, a 15-year-old daughter of one of the railroad workers whose family had settled in town. Patrick's carpentry business had expanded to include a shop of his own in the old feed building on the west end of the main street, and he was working from 6 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon most days, building furniture as well as structural work, and Redemption Creek was beginning to understand that he was the kind of craftsman who made things that lasted. In November, Patrick finished a rocking chair from cedar wood and brought it home one evening without announcement, setting it on the back porch where they sat in the evenings. It had a carved detail along the back rail, small and precise, vines and a single prairie flower. Marcella stood looking at it for a long time. "You made me a chair," she said. "I made you a chair," he confirmed. She turned and kissed him, which was still, after 2 months of marriage, a thing that surprised her with how right it felt. He kissed her back with the warmth of a man who was exactly where he intended to be. By December they knew she was expecting. She told him in the morning before the bake, standing in the kitchen with flour on her hands, because she had decided there was no good time to deliver major news and a small time was as good as any. He went very still for a moment, then stepped forward and took her face in his hands, flour and all, and said, "Are you all right?" "I am very well," she said. "I am happy." He looked at her for a long moment and then said, with a roughness in his voice she had not heard before, "I did not think I would have this." "What?" she said. "This," he said and gestured, and she understood he did not mean the kitchen or the bakery but everything, the whole of it, the weight and reality of a life built rather than stumbled through. She covered his hands with hers, flour and all, and said, "Neither did I," and meant it. The winter moved with the particular rhythm of a life that is full. Clara grew interested in Patrick's carpentry and commissioned a cabinet for the dress shop, which turned into a conversation about a new display case, which turned into a project that kept Patrick busy for 3 weeks in February. The Morales land case was proceeding, slowly and with setbacks, but Abelard had found an error in the speculator's filing that had shifted the legal ground significantly, and Alina Morales had come into the bakery in January with a fierce, bright expression and said, We are going to win." Marcella had smiled and meant it. Rose turned out to be an exceptional baker's assistant, quick and careful and genuinely curious about the craft, and by February she could produce a full morning batch unsupervised. Marcella spent those freed morning hours doing the accounts and expanding the provisions side of the business, adding a small selection of dry goods to the bakery's offerings, flour and sugar and spices bought at wholesale from the San Antonio trader, which gave her customers one fewer reason to drive to the larger town 20 miles east. Patrick came home every evening. This was the thing she had not known she was waiting for until she had it. The sound of his step on the back porch, the way he came through the door and set down whatever he was carrying and found her, the ordinary faithfulness of it. He was not a man who made grand gestures, and she had no need of grand gestures. He was a man who fixed things that needed fixing and told the truth and came home, and that was what she had needed all along. They talked most evenings, at the table or on the back porch if the weather was good, and he asked about her day with genuine interest and she asked about his, and sometimes they sat in silence, and the silence was rich with everything that had accumulated between them. In the spring of 1879, on a morning in early April that smelled just like the morning exactly 1 year before when Patrick had first walked into the bakery, a boy was born. He arrived at dawn, quickly and with the brusque efficiency of someone who had places to be, and Patrick, who had been awake all night, held him for a long time with the expression of a man who understood that the world had changed size. They named him Thomas James Ellsworth, Thomas for her first husband, who had been good, and James for Patrick's father, and the boy had Patrick's gray-green eyes and Marcella's determined jaw, and he slept in the cradle Patrick had made from pecan wood in the corner of their bedroom from the very first night. The Morales case was decided that same April in a decision by the county court that found the Spanish land grant valid and the speculators filing fraudulent. It was not the final word, there would be appeals, but it was a significant and real victory, and Alina Morales came into the bakery with her husband and her son Diego, who was now a young man of 20 and working the ranch, and they brought a bottle of good Mexican brandy and sat at the small table and drank a toast. Patrick raised his glass and said, "To land that stays where it belongs," and Alina looked at him across the table with something in her eyes that was part gratitude and part recognition. The summer of 1879 was the best summer Redemption Creek had had in years. The rains came right, and the cattle prices held, and the railroad brought new business along the main street without bringing too much disorder along with it. The Gazette ran a small piece on the bakery, describing it as the best established provisions business in the county, and noting that Patrick Ellsworth's carpentry work was of a quality that several pieces had been ordered by families in San Marcos and Austin. Clara read the piece aloud in the bakery with great ceremony while baby Thomas slept in the basket behind the counter. "The finest bakery in the county," she said. "That is what you are." "The Gazette is generous," Marcella said. "The Gazette is accurate," Patrick said from behind the counter where he was repairing the bread rack. "They might have mentioned the cinnamon rolls specifically." "You can write them a letter," Marcella said. "I will do that," he said. She threw a dish towel at him, and Clara laughed, and baby Thomas woke up and added his voice to the room, and Marcella picked him up and held him against her shoulder and looked at the room, the flower-warm air and the window light and her friend laughing and her husband smiling at her over a dish towel, and she felt the full weight of it, the realness and the permanence of it. She had not been saved. That was the important thing, the thing that made all the difference. She had not been waiting to be rescued, and she had not been rescued. What had happened was something else entirely, something that looked less like saving and more like two people who had each been carrying their own weight for a long time and had found that carrying it together left room for other things. He had come to be useful, not heroic, and in being useful he had made a life alongside hers, not in front of it or around it but alongside it, and the difference was everything. Thomas went back to sleep on her shoulder, and she patted his back and looked at Patrick, who had gone back to the bread rack. And she felt the particular quality of love that is not urgent or desperate but simply true, the kind that does not need to be performed because it is simply present in every ordinary moment. By the fall of 1879, Redemption Creek had grown enough to need a second schoolroom, and Patrick was contracted to build it, a job he took on with the characteristic thoroughness that had made his reputation, finishing it 2 days ahead of schedule and $20 under budget, which endeared him to the school board in a way no amount of charm could have. The schoolteacher, a young woman named Miss Avery who had come from Tennessee, ordered a desk from him and then a bookshelf, and the bookshelf was so well made that her brother in San Marcos ordered two. The bakery expanded physically that fall, a small addition on the east side that gave Marcella a proper provisions room and freed up the front counter for the bread and pastry trade. Patrick built it over 3 weekends, and she helped with the interior work, painting the shelves herself, and Rose helped them hang the new shelving on a Saturday morning, while Thomas watched from his basket and occasionally offered opinions. Winter came in with a cold clarity, and the town settled into the inward season the way small towns do, the conversations at the bakery counter getting longer, the coffee being drunk more slowly, the world contracting to the circle of what was close and warm. Patrick and Marcella spent the cold evenings reading, a habit they had developed in the fall when he had gotten 2 books from a trader, one a history of the Mexican territories and one a novel by a woman whose name Marcella had never heard but whose writing she found extraordinary. They read aloud to each other in turns, something she had done with her father long ago, and it was one of the things she loved most about their evenings, his voice on the pages and the fire going and the small solid presence of Thomas asleep upstairs. He told her one evening in December that he had never been read to as an adult before, that the experience of it was different than he expected. Different how? She said. He considered it. It makes the story real in a way that reading alone does not, he said. Because you are hearing it, which is how stories were first told, and because someone you love is telling it to you. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "My father used to say that a story told is a gift, and a story heard is the courtesy of receiving the gift." He looked at her. "He sounds like someone I would have liked." "He would have liked you," she said. He had no patience for pretension and great respect for people who knew how to do things with their hands. Patrick smiled. "I will take that." The winter deepened into January of 1880, and Marcella found that she was expecting again, which she told Patrick on a Sunday morning, not before the bake this time but after church, sitting in their kitchen with the winter light coming through the window. He received it the same way he received everything, with the steadiness that had been from the beginning the quality she trusted most in him. "Good," he said, and then, with a smile, "Thomas will have company. He will be 18 months, she said. He will think of it as competition. He will adapt," Patrick said. "He has your character. He will figure it out." She laughed, and he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and outside the January light was pale and clean on the frost. The second baby, a girl they named Caroline Ruth, arrived in August of 1880 with considerably more ceremony than her brother had, taking most of a long summer day about the business of arriving and doing so in the end with a cry that brought Thomas toddling to the bedroom door with wide eyes and an expression of profound reassessment. Marcella held her daughter against her chest and looked up at Patrick, who was standing at the side of the bed looking at the two of them with an expression she recognized as the one he wore when something exceeded his capacity to be calm about it. "She has your nose," he said. "She has your forehead," she said. "That is not necessarily a compliment," he said. "It is from me," she said. He sat on the edge of the bed and touched the baby's cheek with one careful finger, and she grabbed it with the extraordinary instinctive grip of the newly born. "Hello, Caroline," he said very quietly. "I am your father. I intend to be very useful to you." Marcella, despite the long day and the exhaustion and the full weight of everything, laughed at this. And it was a real laugh, the kind that came from the deepest part of her. And he looked at her, and his face did what it always did when she laughed. It went open and unguarded and full of a love that was not restrained or managed but simply present. The months that followed were the full and complicated months of a growing family in a growing town. Thomas learned to walk with the unsteady determination of someone who had decided the ground was optional, and Patrick built him a toy horse from pine that Thomas named Cord after Cordell, who was now aging gracefully in Dowd's pasture, given to a slower pace, but still reliable. Caroline slept and then did not sleep and then slept again, and Rose took on more hours at the bakery and turned out to have real talent, her bread eventually matching, and in one case arguably surpassing Marcella's own. "She is better than me at the cornbread," Marcella told Patrick one evening with complete equanimity. "Impossible," he said. "It is not impossible," she said. "She has a better hand for it. I have been thinking of asking her if she wants to become a partner." He looked at her. "A real partner in the business." "She is 20 now," Marcella said. "She has been here for 2 years. She works as hard as I do, and she has better ideas for expanding the provision side. And if I am going to have another," she paused. He looked at her with very careful attention. "We are going to have another," he said. "I think so," she said, "though it is early. But if I am, then I would like the bakery to have someone who can keep it going without me being there every morning at 3. He was very quiet for a moment, and then he stood up from the table and crossed the kitchen and put his arms around her from behind, carefully, and held her in the way he held her when he did not have words, when the feeling was too full for language. "Are you happy?" he said into her hair. She covered his hands with hers. "Yes," she said. "Genuinely and completely, yes." The third baby, another boy they named Samuel Cole, arrived in the spring of 1881, and he was the loudest of the 3 from the first moment and showed every sign of staying that way. Thomas, now 2.5, regarded him with the philosophical acceptance of someone who has already adapted to one sibling and understands the system. Caroline, 8 months old and beginning to move around the floor with alarming speed, was indifferent. Rose Hennessy became a partner in Baker's Bread and Provisions on the 1st of April, 1881, her name added to the sign in the same clean lettering, her 20% ownership formalized in a document that Sheriff Brannock witnessed. She stood outside looking at the sign with an expression that Marcella recognized, because she had worn it herself the first time she saw her name on the building, the expression of someone who has become real in a new way. Patrick had built a new sign for the occasion, the lettering larger and more elegant than the old one, the wood from a piece of cedar he had been saving for the right project. Elena Morales won her land case completely in the summer of 1881, the appeals court in Austin affirming the lower court's ruling, with a decision that also censured the speculator for fraudulent filing. The Morales family held their land. Diego Morales, who had grown into a serious and capable young man, came into the bakery when the news arrived, and he shook Patrick's hand, and then, after a moment's consideration, embraced him, which Patrick received with the slight, genuine awkwardness of a man not quite accustomed to being embraced. Marcella watched from behind the counter and felt the satisfaction of a thing made right, even partially, even imperfectly, the way justice comes in the real world, which is never perfectly and always too slowly, but sometimes, it does come. Redemption Creek in the fall of 1881 was a different town than the one Patrick had ridden into 3 years before. It had a real hotel now, a second general store, a small schoolhouse that was full, and a newspaper that printed twice a week. It had families who had come and stayed, building things that were intended to last. It had the particular energy of a place that had decided to be something. The bakery, Baker's and Hennessy's as the town now sometimes called it, was open 6 days a week and supplied the hotel, the school, and 2 of the ranches on standing contracts. Rose handled most of the morning baking now, and Marcella handled the provisions and accounts, and the pastry work she had always loved most, the cinnamon rolls and the small pies and the spiced cornbread that she had been making since before Thomas and Gerald and everything. Patrick's carpentry shop had a waiting list that stretched 3 months, and he had hired a young man named Felix Ruiz, the nephew of a Mexican trader he knew, as an apprentice. Felix was 17 and gifted with wood in the way some people are gifted, intuitively and deeply, and Patrick was teaching him with the same patience and clarity he brought to everything, not making him a copy of himself but trying to teach him how to see. On an October evening in 1881, Patrick came home from the shop at the usual hour and found Marcella sitting in the cedar rocking chair on the back porch with Samuel on her lap and Thomas and Caroline playing in the last of the autumn light in the yard, and he stopped in the door for a moment and looked at all of it. She looked up at him. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." She followed his gaze over the yard, the children in the slanted golden light, the garden with its autumn clearing, the creek just audible beyond the fence. "Come sit," she said, making room. He pulled the other chair, the one he had built for himself the following Christmas after making hers, and sat beside her, and they watched Thomas instruct Caroline in the serious business of building a stick tower, which she demolished with cheerful regularity. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About how I rode into this town 3 years ago with $37 and a letter of introduction," he said, "and how I almost did not stop. I had been thinking about going north. Montana Territory. I had heard about work up there." She looked at him. "What made you stop?" "The smell," he said, "of your bakery." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said very quietly, "I am glad you were hungry." He looked at her. His expression was the one she loved most in all the expressions she had catalogued over 3 years of knowing his face, the one that was fully open, no management, no containment, just the real thing. "So am I," he said. Thomas's tower collapsed for the 3rd time, and he looked at the wreckage with a philosophical expression before beginning again, and Caroline laughed her small, delighted laugh, and Samuel stirred on Marcella's lap and made a small sound of contentment, and the October light came down through the pecan trees in the yard and turned everything briefly, impossibly beautiful. She had not needed saving. That had always been true. But she had, without knowing it, needed this. The very specific and unreplaceable thing of a person who understood the difference between useful and heroic, who came to stand beside rather than in front, who offered what he had without asking her to be less in exchange. She had built the bakery herself. She had paid the debt herself. She had kept the doors open through 2 husbands and a rattlesnake and a drought and a creditor with ideas above his legal authority. All of that was hers and remained hers and would always be hers. And this was also hers. The man in the chair beside her, the children in the yard, the warm October evening, the smell of tomorrow's bake already thinking itself into being in the kitchen. All of it hers. She reached out and took his hand, and he held it the way he held everything, steadily, without show, for as long as it mattered, which was a very long time, which was, in fact, the rest of it. The Morales family's land flourished through the following years, Diego eventually expanding the ranch to double its former size, and he and his wife became regulars at the bakery, their children learning to read in the schoolhouse Patrick had built. Elena lived to be 79 years old, and when she died she was buried on the land that had been hers, which was the way she had always wanted it. Rose Hennessy married a man named George Calloway, a quiet schoolteacher who thought her cornbread was the finest thing ever made by human hands, which was perhaps a slight exaggeration, but reflected the genuine depth of his feeling. She remained a partner in the bakery, and her children grew up smelling of yeast and warm bread, and she always said it was the best upbringing she could imagine. Felix Ruiz became, in time, a craftsman whose furniture was known across 3 counties. He learned English and kept his Spanish, and he bought a piece of land on the south end of Redemption Creek and built his own house on it, using every skill Patrick had taught him and several he had arrived at himself. Thomas Ellsworth grew up knowing how to bake bread and build things from wood, which his father said was the foundation of civilization. He had his mother's directness and his father's patience, and when he was 22, he fell in love with the daughter of a Fredericksburg clockmaker, a young woman named Helena who thought his seriousness was the most attractive thing she had ever encountered. Caroline Ellsworth was her mother's daughter in the way that matters most, not in appearance or even in temperament, but in the deep structure of her, the foundation of her. She was curious and stubborn and fair, and she ran a general store by the time she was 25 with a precision that made the bookkeepers in the county use her as a reference. Samuel was loud all his life and loved by everyone because of it. Patrick Ellsworth lived to be 74 years old. He worked in his carpentry shop until he was 68, and for the last 6 years he sat on the back porch in his cedar chair and told stories to his grandchildren and watched the pecan trees grow. His hands had the extraordinary beauty of hands that had spent a lifetime making useful things, and when Marcella held them in the evenings, they were as familiar to her as her own. She outlived him by 4 years, and in those 4 years she baked every morning because it was the foundation she stood on, and she sat in her cedar chair every evening because he had made it for her. And she told anyone who asked that she had been married to a good man who understood the difference between being useful and being heroic, and that the difference had made everything. She told them he had never tried to save her. She told them he had offered instead to be useful, and that she had said yes, because she was a practical woman and she knew a good offer when it was made. She told them that it was the best decision she had ever made, and that the best decisions usually looked that simple from the outside, and that the simplicity was the thing that made them so easy to miss. The bakery on the main street of Redemption Creek, Baker's and Hennessy's, and eventually, in later years, Baker's and Hennessy's and Ruiz, because young Maria Ruiz had married into the business by the time Marcella was old, kept its doors open for 47 years in total, from the first morning she and Thomas had lit the oven. It outlasted Ezra Holly's, who had died in debt in 1886, and it outlasted the Redemption Creek Gazette, which had folded in the 90s, and it outlasted the hotel, which burned in 1892 and was rebuilt and burned again and was not rebuilt the second time. The sign above the door, the one Patrick had made from cedar with the clean, careful lettering, lasted 40 years before it had to be replaced. When it came down, they found he had carved something on the back of it, small and precise, hidden against the building all those years. It said simply, "Built with good purpose." Marcella, who was 69 when they found it, stood in the street with the old sign in her hands and read those 4 words, and she thought of him in the early morning light of the bakery, of his hands on the firebox repair and his voice saying, "I have come to be useful, not heroic," and she pressed her hand flat against the old cedar and felt the grain of it under her palm, and she was, as she had been for most of her life, exactly all right.